On today's episode, we are going to talk about sudden death,
Sudden death.
the quick deaths, the not anticipated deaths, the ones that may creep up on you.
Come out of nowhere, and maybe go through the process of what that would look like to a family that's dealing with it. So listen in.
And you may learn something.
Let's talk about death, baby. Let's talk about grief and mourning. Is it argumental or existential? What's it mean to me? Let's talk about death.
Hi, I'm Benny Cabal, and I'm a funeral professional.
And I'm Nicholas Cabal, a psychologist.
Hey, Nick, let's talk about death.
Let's do it.
All right, guys, let's talk about a topic here. Let's talk about the old sudden death.
Ole, like OLE.
The old sudden
death.
death. Well, I think we as normal society, we get almost overwhelmed with ideas of what like the perfect death is, right? You get the Hollywood where it's like you're cozy, snug in your bed, no pain, no
Right. Romanticized death.
romanticized
almost.
death, right?
Yeah.
But let's talk about sudden death. And I think this happens more often than most people realize, right? I mean, if you're the funeral professional, and your funeral professional experience 10 years, I think, are we on 11 or 10? Do you know exact?
So I'm currently running on the 11th wheel. but
Okay, 11th
it's-
11th
we're-
wheel, okay.
we're- we're
and
10.
you're 10 and
We'll say a decade.
10 and apart,
Decade under
Okay.
above death.
a decade under influence, right? There you go.
Yes.
So if you do a decade of your experience, how many of the deaths were the Hollywood fantasized death?
Oh, very.
Would you say?
Very
Like 10%?
few. No, I wouldn't say 10%. There's probably more than 10. What
20?
are we talking? Explain to me what you think the.
Asleep in the bed, comfortable, warm, just went with the light.
Okay, so I'll give it a hefty. I'll go a little bit above. Probably.
And I mean, hefty what?
I'll give it a little extra, just to kind of. I'd rather go higher than lower in this
Okay,
situation.
that's fine.
So we'll say 15 to 20%, maybe.
Okay. So again,
That's a very.
so
that's
we're
a
not even
very
saying-
nice-
we're not
generous.
e-
That's
we're-
generous.
we're
We'll
not
say
e-
15%.
we're not even saying a quarter.
No.
Okay.
Definitely not.
So I think that's what this episode is going to be about. Right?
I'm in my experience, most deaths that I deal with are people in nursing homes that have
Right.
been there for at least a year,
right.
maybe longer. Some people are in nursing homes for a long time, especially when you're talking about dementia and
Oh yeah.
Alzheimer's, or in our case, Doc, with our grandfather Parkinson's. To be honest,
Nasty
most
disease.
deaths that I get called out are those. Now, we do get a lot of the most sudden deaths we get are cardiac arrest. Somebody has a heart attack and just takes them out. Whether that be in their garage, whether that be out while they're pushing snow, in their lazy boy, which some people would say they're still in their house, so that's the dream, right? Is dying in your home. But then also there's a lot of people that go on hospice in their home, so they're in a hospice bed for the last.
Well, I guess a fantasize is like a late or mid 80s person or older, in their 90s or whatever, dying peacefully
Well,
in their bed.
and there's truth, and
Right.
there's truth in this. Everybody jokes about it, but there's truth in like bathroom deaths because you're putting a lot of strain when you are pooping.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you put a lot of strain in everything you do. If you have to walk upstairs every day,
Yeah.
or you have to, but again, I guess what we got sidetracked. We had
No,
a little
so
ADHD moment there.
The sudden death is interesting because there's a lot of extra pieces to the grieving process that maybe in some people, yet again, I'm just talking experience. Some people, they struggle with it because they're like, oh, I should have, yet again, Doc, this should have thing. I should have had him on better diet, or I should have done this, or he should have been checking his, sugar more often. But on top of that too, there's this extra question of here's a perfect example, Doc. We sometimes have people that die in tragic car accidents, right? And sometimes they're 18, sometimes they're 30 years old, sometimes they're newly fathers or newly mothers, right?
I mean, let's even go even deeper than that. We have accidental deaths with drug overdoses. We have
Oh, yeah.
suicides. We have all this stuff that, I mean, if we're going to call it sudden, right, or not anticipated,
Right.
right, death, right. And I think you're talking about the extra stuff that comes with that, but then again, like, what do you see in your profession that you think that maybe we need to do a better job of maybe destigmatizing or I don't even know
You
what
know
to
what?
say.
I'll say this. Here's something that people say that drives me a little bit, but bazonkers, right? So heart attack, right? Well, they didn't feel anything, so they're in a better world, right? Well, to that person, to that wife that just lost her, husband of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever, that might not be comforting to her or him. Or well, at least he was in his home while it happened. Or
Well, and I think there's a human part of us, right? Why did he leave me?
oh, absolutely.
Right? I mean, there's so again, right? We can even talk about non-anticipated versus anticipated death, and we can talk about how there is always other extraneous thoughts or guilt, shame that goes along with it, right? But I think what we really are trying to discuss here is what are the differences in your profession, and maybe I can speak of mine later. Is what do you notice in your profession? Maybe it's when you're meeting with the family or going through the funeral itself or the visitation or um uh,
I could tell you this in the planning side. So sudden death causes a lot of issues because obviously it's sudden, right? And it was not expected. Therefore, a lot of time, as we've talked about before, Nick, people don't talk about what they want for their death plans. They don't talk about where things are. So a lot of the times it leaves the family or the loved ones in this very awkward state because I don't know where dad's stuff is.
I'm gonna pause you for a second because I think this is a great time to bring this up. In your experience, because you deal with pre-needs, right? How many? Give me a rough percentage, at least in our experience, right? Percentage of people that have pre-needs done.
Through a year. So if I have,
So if you had 80 calls in that year, what would be the percentage? Or let's go 100. Let's just round up, right? So you have 100 calls that year. How many of those calls, death calls, are pre-needed?
I would say about 20 end up about pre-needed.
So
maybe
we're
25.
going back to less than a quarter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even people that are in their late
80s,
80s, yes,
90s,
don't have a pre-need done.
70s.
Okay.
A lot of them don't even talk to their children on what they want. Or they'll tell you to one kid, this, I want to be cremated, another kid, they want to be buried.
Or they do the blanket statement, put me in a shoebox, bury me in the backyard.
So now this family's dealing with a sudden death. They're dealing with this extra strain of, I don't know what he or she wanted or they wanted. And there's all this extra work too, because you need to know where certain things are. And if it's sudden, you're not expecting that. And Doc, and I'm sure you can get more into this. When there's a sudden death, a lot of the time, I'm not saying all the time, a lot of the time, people are in shock. So they're legitimately moving. They're talking. They're there, but they're not there. They are not present in the moment. They are going through the what
we would call this disassociated.
Okay, they're disassociated. They're literally in a haze.
They are an autopilot,
and it's disbelief too. And we're in a society where you have to plan something right away. So not only are my son died.
Wait a minute. Let's back the train up. We're in a society where you have to plan things right away. What do you mean by that?
As in, like, what are we gonna do? We got to have a funeral right now. We got to have this, or we got to get him cremated right now, or we got to like that.
Is there a time frame here? What are we talking about?
I'm just talking about in general. When something happens, that's where the person's mind goes. So they're already not even thinking about their own grief. They're thinking about, I have to do this.
Oh, I get it. They're distracted by all the other things they have to do.
Correct. So when you're talking about something like a sudden death, on top of dealing with, I don't know why this person is gone. I don't believe that this person is gone. I'm doing the quotes right now. You get it. where they're in disbelief still. They're in this haze. They're in shock.
Well, and the other thing is, let's be real, right? In a sudden death situation, right? Most time, if not all the time, they're going to the coroners. So it's not even the funeral home coming to pick them up, correct? It's not even someone that you may trust.
No, and that's another thing too. Good. That's really because this is a conversation that I've been having with my. I just started calling some of my local precincts. The police officers and the firemen are the first people that these families sometimes see.
Well,
So
it would make sense, right? Because
Right.
the 911
Emergency.
call, the emergencies are going to show up.
correct.
But my question is okay. So to the listeners out there, to the non-educated in your line of work, what happens in a sudden death?
It depends, and sometimes they actually call us first, and they'll say,
But
my
do you
husband's
guys-
on the ground. What do I do? And the first thing you do is you call 911.
Right.
So you're gonna have your local fire or your ambulance or whatever the local
Ambulance,
ambulance, your local what am I thinking of?
the first responders,
The first responders are going to
Yeah.
show up. So whether that be the cop that's in the area, whether that be
the
the
fire,
firemen, or whether
or
that be
ambulance.
the
So
we're
okay,
not
so
saying
so
that right.
let's fast forward a little bit. So they get there, they assess the situation, the person is dead. They don't know how.
So what's going to happen is the cops usually are going to take pictures. They're going to
Okay.
make the police officers are going to make pictures and make sure if there's no foul play, in their opinion, they will call the doctor. Now, if the local doctor or their doctor says he was in good health, I'm not signing off on that death certificate. So that's where this comes in. So explain this to the audience here. So basically what happens is you need a doctor to sign off on a death, have a time of death, and be able to put a cause of death. If the local doctor or your primary says, no, I'm not doing that, you're going to end up going to the coroner where the medical examiner is going to sign off.
Okay, so explain to the viewers what
The
actually happened.
viewers.
Or sorry, the
The
listeners. They're viewing us.
I
They-
see.
they
They're
ha-
viewing
they have
us
a
in their
picture of us.
ears. Got it.
But I'm saying, like, what actually happens at that point?
Okay, so the police officers are on the scene. They take the pictures. They call. Let's say
Who comes and picks up the body?
then they call the ME. The medical examiner comes and gets the body.
So the actual coroner comes. and
No,
gets the
no,
body.
no, no, no. The coroner has staff that comes and gets them.
So they have a company,
the
probably.
county, yes,
Okay.
and it may even be another funeral home in the area who comes and gets
Okay,
them.
But
and
for the
then
most part, most of these people do not have any relationship with the people that are coming to pick up the
100%,
deceased. Okay.
100%, from the police officer to the fireman to the paramedic. That's what we were looking for earlier. They have no. We were talking about an ambulance,
Yes,
but we
the
didn't say paramedic,
ambulance.
which is not giving due
Yeah. Yeah,
justice to
it's-
all the amazing paramedics out there. But yeah, so then they come and they take up to the thing. Now here's the other thing. Now we're on delay.
Yes.
So now the family might, especially in our community, I'm speaking subjectively through us Capals, they want to know that their loved one's back in Ida.
Yeah.
So now their loved one has been taken from Ida because in our community, in many communities, there's not a local medical examiner. We have a Monroe County medical examiner, but the actual morgue that does the autopsies for us right now is in Lucas County.
Okay.
Or it used to be in Wayne. So they're either they're going an hour away to 40, 30 minutes away.
They're either going north or south, but
Yeah.
they're not staying in
They're
Ida
not staying in Ida.
or Monroe County. So let me ask you this, right? Okay, so they come transport the body to the morgue,
Yep,
right?
Absolutely.
Is anybody from that part, not your part, but on the morgue side, is anybody like letting the family know what's going on?
Yeah, so this is tricky because the problem is I'm not there, so I don't know exactly what is said or what is done. I do know that they're supposed to give the family, and it's usually the police officer gives them what morgue they're being transferred to. So in that case, they'll say Monroe County medical examiner has taken this case. He'll go down to Lucas County morgue. Here is the ME case number.
So do they also give them a number to like?
No,
Okay.
they give them their card usually that'll have their number, the officer's
Okay.
number, and they'll tell them to. So in our community, we're lucky enough where the police officers will then call us because they're doing the family a service by calling us, so the family doesn't have to. What I find out in the bigger cities is they don't do that. So they'll say, here's our card, here's the medical examiner's case number. Now you have to call the funeral home. So now this family's dealing with a sudden death. They're dealing with, what do I got to do? They just took him. I'm not 100% sure where Lucas County is because most people don't know where morgues are. And then now I have to call the funeral director. I haven't even talked to my kids yet. Maybe one of the kids hasn't even showed up to the house yet. So all this is happening at once. This is the conversation that people don't talk about. This is why sudden deaths are so traumatic, because there is, Nick, all this, and I'm glad you're kind of walking me through this, because there is all these steps.
So okay, so let's stay on train right now. So the autopsy is completed, right? The
Post.
ME, the
Yep.
whatever,
Yep.
does the post, whatever. Then what happens?
Then we have to contact the morgue to make sure when the body's
We
released.
contact them, or
We
they
do.
let us know
They do
that
not
it's
let
not
us
done?
know when it's done.
Okay, so we basically
So
get,
the family
we,
contacts us, or the police officer contacts us. We usually have to wait about 24 hours to 48, depending on what we're talking about, because there's not much done on the weekends, a lot of the morgues. So then we wait until the body's released, then we get the body, and then we have to do the preparation at that point if we need to.
So at that point the body is cleared. So they say, "Yep, it's been performed, done.
Mhm.
You need to come pick it up." Right?
Yes.
Correct. So you guys go and get it, right?
Yep.
And then you bring it back and do whatever preparation you
Correct.
guys need
Whether
to do.
we,
Right.
if it's
And
direct
balm or
cremation
whatever.
or
Yeah.
direct, we don't. Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, what does the family know?
So now at this point, in every funeral home's different, but at this point, Dad and I would contact them and say, your loved one is here, they're safe. We would like to then meet and start arrangements.
Okay. The reason why I went through that process, and I know it was kind of long, and I apologize, but I think it's important
They
because
don't know
this-
that.
because what you just said is the time of death. It may be up to 48 to 72 hours before
It may
you
be
even have
3
the body in the
days
funeral.
before the arrangements are made. So now you're dealing with a family that doesn't want their loved one someplace else. Now they're in a cold morgue, right? That's traumatizing for some. Some people don't even want their loved one to be opened up, right? They don't want the autopsy to happen. There's nothing they can do because the medical examiner has full rights. And in all honesty, that should happen because they want to make sure no foul play was done.
Okay, well, I'm going to throw another curveball into there. So I think this is important to talk about. Let's say the person is an organ donor. How does that work?
So at that point, the medical examiner will the donation center, whether that be in every community, it's different, will then contact, or the medical examiner will contact them if the body is viable. 'Cause that's another thing too. Like you got to.
So the medical examiner is going to say if it's viable.
Correct.
But you're saying it could take up to 72 hours before they even are able to
I mean,
perform
I'm talking
there.
like a worst case scenario here. Usually, the body's released within 24 hours. But then if we're talking organ donation, there might be an extra 4 to 6 hours.
Well, and the only reason why I'm saying that is because I think we have to normalize or educate, right, people that it's not like bing bang boom, right?
Well, and the other thing, the biggest issue that the organ donation has situation is just because you don't have your name on a card doesn't mean that your body can't be thought about for organ donation. So they can't take the organs without your permission as a family member or the next of kin, but they can still put the body on hold.
So you're saying the person that is deceased, even if they didn't say they wanted to be an organ donor, could still be an organ donor.
Possible organ donor, absolutely. And legally, we cannot get that body until the family has accepted or declined that invitation.
So back to the shock, right? And I want to go back to this.
Absolutely.
So back to the shock. The family loses a loved one. The family may or may not have to call the funeral home. At the same process, the organ donation people are calling them and asking them, like, how does that work?
So sometimes that's the confusing part. And please listen out there, if you're part of any organ donation, I am not saying anything negative. I think it's a wonderful program. I will say there's this one part that does kind of cause some issues, and it's only because in hospitals, sometimes they don't tell the family before they release the family. So in hospitals, which, Doc, we've talked about, the body goes down to the morgue. So basically what happens is the family's there. They have the opportunity to say goodbye to their loved one. They leave. usually the hospital will then call the funeral home and let us know that the body's there, depending on the hospital, because some hospitals make the family do it, which is another conversation, Doc, we'll talk about later. But then what happens is they don't tell them that they're going to hold their loved one for organ donation. So the problem is, in our small community, our families, the expectation is Dad and I are going to get that body as soon as we can. So within the hour of that body being down in the morgue, most people are expecting Dave or Benny or Capaldi in this situation to be already on their way to the hospital to get their loved one. What happens is then we get a call here that says this is organ donation, the body's on hold. Sometimes they'll even tell us that before they tell the family. So I will then call the family to let them know, hey, just so you know, we haven't gotten your loved one because this is what's going on. You have the opportunity to say yes or no, but until you do that, and I'm not telling them to do one way or another, I'm telling them until you do that, we cannot go get your loved one.
So they tell you the body's on hold,
Correct.
and you guys can't do anything until they get a yes or no from the family.
Correct.
So you're telling me that the family then is contacted by them
By the organ donation.
whenever they
get around to it, and I've been told sometimes they wait because they don't want to traumatize the family in that situation. My problem is, so the family gets home thinking everything is
ship shape, like
I don't want to say hunky dory because it's not the right terminology, that everything is being taken care of and their local funeral director that they trust is on their way, and then now they're getting a call 2.5 hours later that, okay, this is organ donation, your loved one is still at blah 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 blah. They thinking that the body's already taken, because some people are very against organ donation. They're against their loved one being opened up. That's that's why people put organ donation on cards and stuff.
When it is on the card, is that for sure it's going to happen?
No, it's just the opportunity that they know that the hospital knows that this person is willing to.
They
do
still
that.
have to get the yes or no from the family.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They can't just.
Don't quote me on that, but I'm
Okay.
pretty sure they still get.
I'm just curious because again, these are a lot of questions.
Yeah, but
and a lot of things
but
to
let's
keep
be
in the
honest.
back
If
of your mind.
your loved one had a organ donation on their card, most people are going to go by what the loved one wanted, right? So,
Right.
but in this case, and I can tell you on more than enough fingers, there's been a lot that haven't had that, didn't know that, and then were upset because I never gave them permission to hold my husband or my blah 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 to do that.
Okay.
So that causes a problem with Dad and I, because now we're waiting, and sometimes they're not going to answer their phone for a number they don't know what it is.
Right.
So now they're waiting to hear from the next of kin, which the next of kin may be sleeping, because a lot of deaths happen, as we know.
So in your opinion, what
Late at
could make this process better? The hospital telling the family that?
I think the organ donation conversation needs to happen then. It has to happen right at the death, when the family is having
and you could tell them, take your time, you could go and
Oh,
talk
right.
about
I'm,
this.
I'm,
and stuff,
I'm not
but
saying like throw it at them,
but
I'm
the
saying
funeral home can't.
before you call
Yeah.
the funeral home, before you let the family release, you should say, hey, your loved one may be viable for body donation. Have you thought about that? Is that something you guys would want to continue with? Yes or no? Done.
Okay, so now let's fast forward. Right now, the body is in the funeral home.
Yeah.
Right. It's a sudden death.
Okay.
We set up a time to meet with the family.
Okay.
And then let's continue the conversation, because I think one of the things that, at least in my experience, even being involved in the funeral home as long as I have, there is a lot of questions that it's like, why does that happen that way? Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, is this something that we maybe need to, talk to our local governor or whatever? Like, I don't, and again, like I said, I'm not saying this is a bad process. I'm just saying we're adding this to someone who just lost their loved one to a sudden death.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and there's a lot of other questions too that come in, because if you're talking about cremation, as we talked about, Doc, here in the state of Michigan, you have to have majority rules if it's down to kids, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing. We've talked about that before.
But so basically, just a quick synopsis: if you had 4 children and 2 said no and 2 said yes, cremation cannot.
Okay,
happen.
so so I got to go down the line first. So if they're not married and their parents aren't around, and they have kids that are above 18, yes, then it becomes a majority of your children. So if you have 4 kids, 3 of them have to sign off on cremation in the state of Michigan, or that cremation does not happen.
Okay, back to that rule. I'm just throwing this out here because I just want you to think. I'm putting you on the spot. So let's say there is 4 children. You can't get a hold of one of them, but 2 say yes, 1 says no.
Then you can't, because you don't want to have that issue.
Okay.
But
So-
that's the problem, because it's sudden. They didn't have time to prepare, so you can't get like the funeral representative, which we've talked about before.
Right.
You can't. So now they got to get all these kids in too, because nobody lives by each other anymore.
No,
too.
so
you
you
got
gotta fly
3 kids
in,
that
yep.
are in
Yep.
across the United States. So the sudden death, and then you're going through the actual visitation, funeral, maybe direct cremation, maybe memorial service, all that. And you're still have all these unanswered questions. And now you're waiting for the cause of death, which you may not get for 4 to 6 months later.
Right.
So,
Right.
and then on top of that, you can't do any life insurances a lot of the time because they want to see cause of death. So you're stuck in this place where you can't get a lot of the logistics done. You can't get a lot of your mental stability because you're still wondering, wanting to know why this person died so suddenly. And you're also scared because in some you're worried, like, did they do some drugs?
Right.
Were they drunk when they did this?
Our brains do a lot of crazy things when we're
and
left. to
there's a
wonder.
toxicology report that comes back with so all of this is encompassing. So I'm going to be honest, I don't think these people mostly can grieve until after a lot of that is accomplished. And even that, you're already talking prolonged grief, because they can't even start their grieving journey until they find out what the cause of death
Right.
is.
Well, I mean, I've always made the blanket statement that I really truly believe grief starts about 6 months. 6 months after, right? Is that you need the first 6 months to take care of all of the, all the, where's the life insurance plan, get that, and then you got to send death certificates to the life insurance, correct?
It's a whole it really is. Like, sudden death causes a lot more questions.
Stress. Well, and it causes a lot more stress.
100% anxiety. But Doc, before we get in the Q&As, I do have a question for you. If you could, and this is very subjective, if you could choose the death for yourself, what would be, I guess, what would you rather it be sudden, or would you rather it be prolonged?
I don't know. I've always liked the song Billy Joel, "Only the Good Die Young," and I don't know. The reason why I say I don't know is because I have had the pleasure and honor to work with, people in their late 80s, early 90s in therapy, and I can tell you a lot of them are ready. They're ready to go, and I just, you brought up Parkinson's, you brought up some of these really Alzheimer's, dementia. I don't know where I would be at 80, late 80s, early 90s, and have something like that. I think that would be horrifying to not be able to recognize people that I love and not be able to recognize myself. I think at that point, I don't know. It's a great question.
That goes back to
because
are you living or are you existing?
But here's the thing. Only the good die young, right? But then there's a huge part of me that cannot wait to see my grandchildren.
Right.
Cannot wait to see, my great-grandchildren if I'm lucky enough to have that. But am I going to recognize my children at that point? Am I going to recognize my wife who...
But you also hear of like 100-year-olds that still are kicking it.
Oh, absolutely.
But that's a problem too, because then you're losing everybody. Your best friends are dead. Your family's mostly dead. You're on to great grandchildren.
I think this is a great future episode, because we could talk about this, and I would love to talk about this, because if I could choose, I don't want to choose that. I am a firm believer in things happen for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever that happens, it happens, because I've always had that psychological battle in my head, like, if you could know when you were gonna die, would you want to know?
Yeah,
I don't know if I would.
I don't think
because
I
feel like my anxiety would make it worse. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, I only got 5 years left. And I mean, 5 years is quite
at the end of the day, Doc, there's not many surprises we have left as you get older. Let that be I think that's truthfully, we talk about this all the time. Like the idea that we live is built on the process that we don't know when we're going to die.
Well, you got to have the yin with the yang.
You got to have the yin with the yang. Well,
Let's
Doc,
get to some questions.
let's get to those questions.
Q&A, everyone loves that Q&A.
Q&A,
Those questions.
Q&A,
I got
you
some
gotta
questions.
give
I got
me
some answers.
Q&A.
I got some questions and some answers. All right, you ready for this? All right, Q&A, Doc. Here we go. Whew. Hello, guys. About my near-death experience when I was in hospital in March of 2020. Ooh, COVID year. Hello, huge fan of your channel. Let's talk about death. My name is Ian Taylor from Totton, Southampton, UK. About 2 years ago, I had an operation. I almost died. Had surgery on my stomach, tumor, endocrine tumor, cancer was the blame. The surgeons mess up my operation. First time around, redo the surgery procedure. The second attempt knocked me out for about 4 days, Sunday into Thursday. I think I remember I was placed into the cardiac room for several days, monitoring my temperature. Awful experience. I had 3-hour blood transfusion. Also, after losing half pint of blood, nearly about to die, I was 3 weeks on a drip during March 2020. Please understand, I have autism. A disability causes me serious mental condition. Please respond to my email. Most grateful. I remember when I was in the hospital laying in bed on the drip, I could not feel my body movement. I called the doctor quickly. He gave me a shot of morphine drug. The tinkle in my body came back, wonderful feeling. Morphine, my legs and arms could move again. When the surgeon planning to do the keyhole surgery on my first attempt, but the second time round, they cut me open straight down my stomach. Looks awful. Remember seeing the staples clinched together on my stomach. Thanks, Ian Taylor. Your thoughts, Doc, on this?
Well, I mean, what a traumatic experience, right? And you know, being an empathetic soul, like thinking of myself in a bed going through all that, almost torture, it sounds like. You know, if that doesn't bring anticipatory grief, I don't know what does. You know, the idea that some crazy surgery like that to, you know, prevent you from dying could actually kill you. And, you know, it's funny because not funny, but in my mind, it's very interesting to think about, you know, how we treat cancer, right? We treat cancer by killing everything, right? That's what chemo, and, you know, obviously that's not the scientific version of that. But I mean, the idea that we actually kill parts of us so that we can live longer. Death is such a fascinating topic to talk about, and it sounds like you really were put through the ringer. And you know, I'm glad that you're here to tell the tale. I think if there's probably a lot of people around you that are blessed to still have you in their life, and I hope that you're living life to the fullest as best as you can, because, you know, that sounds like a very traumatic experience to continue to survive, to live. And what a blessing your family and your friends and anybody who knows you, to have you still in their life. So thanks for writing this in. Thank you for asking us what we thought. But, you know, I guess I'm glad you're here. Glad you're here.
Absolutely. Like that sounds, whew. I mean, 2 surgeries, all those days where you're in there, you're on morphine, you can see that was you painted a picture, you know, because that's the thing, right, that I've learned as I've gotten older, is you take these mental pictures and that's what stays with you. That's what you remember of things. You know, you remember your grandfather's lap, or you remember like the house, and you remember a certain picture in a certain way. But you remember having this mental picture of your stomach stapled together. Like that has to feel very kind of like a Frankenstein, right? You kind of feel very much out of body, and you almost feel like, you know, that there's these new pieces, this whole it's absolutely traumatic. And on top of that too, thank you for being open enough to tell us about your autism too, because I'm sure that added to your experience as well. And I think for you, going out and talking about it, especially talking it to maybe other autistic people that have dealt with crazy surgeries and out of body experiences and close to death experiences. I think that would be very helpful. So yet again, thank you for honoring us with this story. It's not necessarily a question or an answer, but I think it was a great conversation, and it's something Doc, Nick, and I will have to think about more. So thank you for that. Keep writing us up. That was quite the story.
Great questions. Thank you guys so much for listening in and sending in your thoughts, your questionings, your emotions. We really appreciate that. It gives us something to talk about. And we appreciate you guys listening in.
Yeah, and keep sending us those questions, and you can get to us at letstalkaboutdeathpod@gmail.com. Like us, subscribe, send us out star it up. Star it up. If you're not talking about death,
you're not living. Thank you so much.